Oh, all right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy in the Discipline 612 June webinar. We are excited to have you here, and we are delighted that you have joined us for tonight's webinar called Making a Difference, Strong Literacy Instruction for Students in Poverty. I do want to thank our funders, the South Carolina Middle Grades Initiative, who funded this opportunity for us all to be here. It is truly an honor to introduce our featured speakers, Dr. Vicki Risko and Dr. Doris Walker-Dalhouse, two nationally recognized literacy scholars whose careers have been dedicated to advancing equitable literacy opportunities for students and teachers, and people that I just absolutely admire and adore. Dr. Risko is a professor emerita at Vanderbilt University. She taught in the Language, Literacy, and Culture program within the Department of Teaching and Learning. She is just somebody that is passionate about supporting and learning alongside educators in high poverty and racially diverse schools. She's also past president of both the International Literacy Association and the Association of Literacy Educators and Researchers. And she has made significant contributions to literacy research, assessment, and teacher education. And then we also have the wonderful Dr. Doris Walker-Dalhouse, who is a professor emerita at both Marquette University and Minnesota State University, Moorhead, and recently retired. Are we adding to that credential then? She was a former 4th through 6th grade teacher in high poverty schools, and her work spans literacy, culturally sustaining pedagogy, refugee education, community-based literacy initiatives, and she has also served in numerous leadership roles across the literacy profession and currently serves as are you in the process of transitioning for the president of the Reading Hall of Fame?
I am the current president of the Reading Hall of Fame, so my term will end at the end of December meeting in Honolulu, Hawaii.
When I said greatness is here, I was not kidding you. And so their scholarship and advocacy continue to shape how educators think about literacy, equity, and opportunity. And with that, I would please ask you to join me in welcoming these two wonderful and powerful literacy scholars to share their learning.
Thank you.
And to
Thank
talk with
you,
us.
Rachel.
I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction and for the opportunity. And I also want to thank the members of Literacy and the Disciplines 612 group in advance for the invitation to be part of this webinar, Making a Difference, Strong Literacy Instruction for Students in Poverty. As you have introduced us by name, I want to also make you aware of, as we prepared for this webinar, we created 4 questions to guide us in our conversation today, focused on literacy and students living in poverty. And Rachelle has graciously put those in the chat. But the first one is, why must there be an increased focus on educating children and youth living in poverty? Number 2, how has in-school literacy instruction failed students in poverty? And then number 3, what are common elements of strong literacy instruction that supports students living in poverty? And lastly, what are some of the examples of powerful literacy instruction? We invite you to participate in the conversation with us by sharing your ideas in the chat that you will see located on your screen. Our commitment to sharing and extending knowledge about the topic of students living in poverty emanated from our teaching and work with teachers and students. It grew as we engaged in research for our book, Equitable Literacy Instruction for Students in Poverty, and from the knowledge shared by the 21 talented literacy educators, researchers who participated and contributed into their knowledge to our book. And that includes our hosts for today, Rachelle Savitz and Janelle Williams. So we are delighted to have this opportunity to share with you today. So I'll hold up a copy of our book so that you can see that as well. But let's begin to get the conversation started with question number one, as we address the issue of thinking about why now, or why is there this increased focus on educating children and youth that are in poverty. And I'll start us off by thinking about the recent NAEP scores as they are published, thinking about particularly about where we see some improvement or some growth for 9-year-olds. We also are challenged to think about 13-year-olds who've not shown that significant improvement since 1971. And we also are aware of the fact that from that report that only 14% of 13-year-olds reported reading for fun on a daily basis, and that has continued to drop over the years. Being a resident of the state of Wisconsin and Milwaukee in particularly, we look at the fact that our students, as we look at a 38% Black population and approximately 32% white and 20% of other people in Milwaukee that are Hispanic or a combination of races and ethnic groups, that we're concerned with the fact that we need to address the needs of these students in our schools. And with a high poverty rate for children under 18 nationally at about 14.3%, in Milwaukee, in particularly, we see a 35.1% of children living in poverty, among the highest in Wisconsin, and as also compared to other U.S. cities. And we know that these students live in high poverty schools. So when we think about the greatest racial as well as wealth disparity that attend schools in the Milwaukee area, and this disparity that exists between races in Wisconsin, we are most concerned that the most vulnerable of our students are being left out and need to have more focus. Vicki.
Well, and there are multiple statistics that you can trace, national and local statistics that are reported about the number of students who are living in poverty. For example, the National Center for Education Statistics reports that 1 out of 7 students that are school age are living with insecure food or insecure home situations, and some of those students are not living in homes or homeless. I looked up our statistics here in Florida, and there again, there's a high percentage, 25% to 28% of the students in southwestern, what would this be? This is southwestern Florida is on the list of living in high poverty. So there's a major problem, and what we think is happening and will happen in the future is the statistics are going to go up. I mean, think about this. We're talking about maybe a fourth of a class of this 20 students or 25 students are living in poverty. Higher numbers in the area outside of Fort Myers, for example, where migrant farmers are working. And there I'm finding anywhere from 32 to 30% of those families are living in high poverty. Food insecurity is a big issue. Home insecurity is a big issue. Associated with high poverty, though, is also the number of schools that are underfunded. And as Gorski says in his book about children living in poverty, privilege begets privilege, but poverty begets poverty. So many of these students are in situations where there are limited supplies, teachers who are not certified for the students that they are teaching, teachers who may not be prepared to think about students who are living in poverty. I recall my first teaching assignment was in a steel mill town. I had 37 first graders, and I was the only, and I was a new teacher, so you can imagine, for 37 first graders, all of whom were living in high poverty situations. And the emphasis that year was on teaching them to read. And I think back about that, how little I really knew about them as individuals and how little was done to accommodate some of the particular needs that they had. So it's a big issue. And we think with cuts in funding that are currently happening at the national level, that the numbers will continue to rise.
And I would add our immigrant population as we think about that increase, even though we have the problems that exist in terms of deciding who needs to be considered as an American in this state that we are currently in, that it does impact the fact that we do have multilingual individuals. We have individuals that are seeking a better life, that are a part of our country. And so we need to address those needs. The decreasing funding for programs like SNAP really make us more alarmed about this urgency that we see in trying to make sure that some of the longstanding inequities are addressed. For example, we know that in Milwaukee, at the north side of our area, has about 22 schools out of the 50 that are the low performing high poverty schools. And those are the schools where teachers need the support, need the ideas, and also need to hear the voices of the students so that they educate them, but they also educate the broader number of students in classrooms today. I think if there are other ideas and comments, please feel free to share. But I think we've addressed and looked at what we want to start off as an introduction with question 1. But the second question is, how has in-school literacy instruction failed students living in poverty?
And it's interesting, several people have done an analysis of the programs in the United States. Navarro is one, and in her analysis, and also those of others, there's this careful look at the federal programs, lots of money that have been put into programs such as No Child Left Behind, even Head Start. If you look at the mixed data that are coming, and Head Start was a very successful program in a number of regions, but there are mixed data supporting the question about how effective is it for all students, especially those students living in poverty. And the issue seems to be this sameness. We have addressed literacy difficulties by providing instruction that is the same for everyone. The premise is that equality means everyone gets the same, everyone gets a fair chance. But unfortunately, that doesn't then help us think about the differences of our students. And we've known for 100 years, before I started teaching, and that was 100 years ago probably, that the students have individual differences. Each of us, as we're looking at each other and thinking right now, we all have individual differences, but we've not addressed those in the programs that are designed specifically to help the students who are experiencing difficulties. Instead, all students are expected to pass the same test. So there are no adjustments based on students' cultural knowledge, prior knowledge, language use, etc. And there are scripted programs, one after another. Once I retired from Vanderbilt, I was asked to help our State Department implement literacy instruction with literacy coaches, and they were a wonderful group of people. We had a wonderful time. But unfortunately, that program was ended much too quickly because there was this need to bring in lesson plans and curricula that would script what teachers said. And you know what happened? Student scores began to fall again. So this sameness approach, while seemingly is fair for all, has turned out to be unfair and has not addressed the particular needs, those differences of our students.
And I would add that it is also one of the oversights that we often feel because of pressure from school districts' policies. the situation in which we find ourselves as teachers, the focus on the kind of social emotional health of the students that are in their respective urban high poverty classrooms, and in general those students that have the kinds of challenges of trauma that are both longstanding as well as those kinds of immediate challenges faced day to day. So focusing in on the kind of mental, social health that would enable students to be able to function, addressing the topics that are relevant to the communities in which they reside, the issues faced, such as food deserts, for example, the kinds of climate related, housing related issues, and having those critical skills that students need to have to be challenged to think about how life and learning are integral parts. They're so connected that we need to make sure that we are tapping in on those things to make sure that we can individualize, but also collectively meet the needs of our students.
And there are questions about instruction, and so we are going to move to that. But I noticed this one question, which is interesting, says, what happened to teaching the family, supporting the family at home on a personal level, considering culture and learner diversities? And that's a wonderful question. I'm not even sure where that did happen, but there certainly is a cutback right now in distinguishing programs that are addressing diversity. Diversity has become a word that means unequal practices, so that some students get better instruction than others. And of course, that's not what is intended. The intention is to differentiate instruction so that all students receive the best support that they can to enable their literacy development and also to engage families. So the question about what happened to teaching the family, I don't know where that happened. It certainly didn't happen in Nashville when I was there, and I don't think it's happening here in Florida. What about others of you?
I think so. Wilson County does something where they have like parent coaching almost. I haven't been to one of their sessions, but they give kind of like parenting tips and like how to address behavior and how to like support learning at home, because we found as a county that unprepared parents generally make unprepared students. But
Yeah,
I think that overall, from at least when I was a kid, the partnership between schools and families has seemed to like broken down a lot. Like parents aren't as welcome in the school community. Some schools do PTOs better than others, and generally it's the wealthier schools that have really good involved PTOs, and then the more impoverished schools or underfunded schools have PTOs that are more hands off and they're out of the school. They're only there when the kids are gone. Um, and there just seems to be this separation. And then, of course, this distrust from parents to teachers and to the schools in general.
and I think that goes back to the teacher preparation programs as well as the school district. What are the goals for the school district? How do they involve and invite parents into the classroom? I think there is a trend, at least in high poverty areas, for example, where fewer parents are attending meetings with teachers. They didn't particularly like school sometimes, so they don't really want to go back. But it's not only that. It's been difficult to reach out and communicate with each other, and so I take that as a need for our professional development programs to support teachers' engagement with families and invitations into the community. I've worked with some teachers who go to all the community events, all the state fairs, all the local markets, etc., as a way to begin conversations with teachers. And then I've worked with other teachers who have not taken that opportunity, and maybe we've not supported that in professional development. It's a good question.
A good question. I would just add that I know some of our charter schools, some of our, and we know that that is part of that parent involvement. Those religious affiliated schools are more supportive of sending out teachers to be part of the community, inviting them to be part of efforts to support through fundraising, through education, through community knowledge, awareness of what the school is about. I also know as Judith Pollock's work and others that have looked at home visits as ways of involving and educating parents to help with their children. I know work schedules, all of the other kinds of life events that prevent some families, particularly those who were not successful students in school themselves, from feeling that the school is a safe environment. I think it does make us more aware that teacher education needs to do more with parents, making our prospective teachers aware of the assets and supports and knowledge that parents bring, and to value their ways of knowing within classroom contexts, not just for a monthly kind of celebration of maybe a Black History Month or other Hispanic Awareness or Appreciation Week, but the real knowledge that parents bring about how to operate within the world and the ways in which their churches may provide the support for their children's learning. Gwendolyn Thompson McMillan wrote about the fact that her son did perform better within the church context than he did within the school context. And that was kind of taking that knowledge of what the child does within those outside community endeavors and bringing that knowledge into the classroom, into the schools, would help to foster that level of achievement that we know is so critical for our students.
Something I noticed starting at the pre-K level, both of my younger two children have severe autism. So the types of home visits to prepare us for self-contained pre-K or even mixed pre-K, we welcomed them into our home and we began to build a relationship. And then it's pre-K, kinder, and then something just falls off. And now as a teacher, wanting to make those connections to reach out to my parent families, like it's taken more time than it took, say, my son and daughter's teacher to establish relationship with me. And I know the difference is the area I'm teaching in, and I need to understand the families that I'm teaching so I can appropriately support their kids, because I'm a self-contained adapted curriculum special educator, and there aren't always outreach events for this population of student. So it's like there's this double whammy for these families and how we reach them and love them and let them know they're welcome, and their way is okay. Like we want to support you where you are. Like we want to know who you are, not who you want to pretend to be or who you think we need you to be. We just want you to be you so we can support your kid. And pour into them the way I would say many of us here in this platform were poured into at one time or another.
It's so important.
So,
I'm sorry. You were
no,
gonna
I just wanted to say, I wonder if there's a relationship between the time period where we began not requiring homework and the lack of parent involvement, because to me, homework was a communication with my teacher. You know, if something came home and we were working on it and my child didn't know what to do, that was pause for me to interact with the teacher, or if she did great, it was a positive reason to interact with the teacher. And I know homework is hard to do in many families, but it was a connection that was a requirement of every student.
Yeah, I think in many ways we have failed our students related to the communication with parents. Some schools still have homework, but I'm not sure that's used as a vehicle to communicate with teachers. I'm not sure there are opportunities to communicate with teachers. I
I
think
would
that
love.
I was just going to say, I think as educators, we need to come together within school systems and think about the power of parent involvement, and then
Yeah.
make those statements and acknowledge the importance of parents to the support of their students, and so that it's really a community-wide effort, and we're all working together. But I don't know if that's happening. I don't think it is happening in many schools where I've been working with teachers.
I think the most communication is generally when there are issues that need to be problems that are solved, inappropriate or behavior, the kinds of things that most parents, even in the best of children in wholesome homes, will not say that they want to hear. It's something that's a problem. But I think the notion of making good calls home, our newsletter, using our technology to ways to establish some communication, meeting parents in community settings where they feel comfortable if the home is not the source of those kinds of meetings. I think those would be helpful to opening the doors rather than, and then being realistic about the progress in wanting to communicate and share how parents can help their children to be more successful. I think those are all ways that we can do things we can do a better job, and ways that we maybe haven't explored to the extent that we need to.
Right. And if a school is going to commit to this, then they need to decide what are the best ways to communicate. I'm thinking of the woman who cuts my hair. Her communication with her teacher is for her 4 children is whether her children are on the right level for accelerated reading. Well, there really isn't much communication going on there, right? She checks their levels, she tells them they are or they're not, and then they're encouraged to move them up. So it's a major set of objectives that need to be addressed if we're going to support families in ways that really are helpful for students and are helpful for us to understand our students better.
And I think that maybe we need to explore our community connections that are there. The liaisons that we have in our schools may be a starting point for introducing and getting a small group with an increasing opportunity for more parents to be involved with learning about the curriculum, about what we're doing within the classroom context, to thinking of multiple ways that they can support the learning. It's not just baking cookies. It's not just providing the tissues and the other school supplies that may, for some families, be challenging, but to think about meaningful ways that things can be done on parents' schedules and not just on the teacher's schedule and time.
There was also a quick comment, and we can address this quickly, but someone pointed out that when we have these scripted curricula coming into schools, we often don't know what the fit is. So school districts will adopt a program because they're wonderful for various reasons, scores have gone up, etc. But we don't know if the populations of students where those programs were tested is a good match with the populations of students in our school districts. And I think that that's a big issue. I think we have failed tremendously at both local and national levels in talking about the curriculum fit. If you're going to have those scripts, then we need to find some things that make sense for the populations we're serving. I would say not have them at all, but at least we could do better in that fit.
And I'll just lastly put a plug in for the state literacy reading associations. Generally, there is a component attached to them to try to address parents and to inform parents through webinars and the other kinds of written communication. But to be involved in those are excellent ways of seeing what the community needs are, and then trying to become more involved with on the educational front. I think that someone mentioned Pizza Hut and the Book It program. Yes, great way of trying to motivate middle school and other students. So we need to think about ways of bringing back the ways that parents could keep and students could be engaged and motivated through the opportunities there to not just have book motivation, but sometimes those tangible kinds of things, the food items, may be what some students need to keep them interested and motivated. Block parties for resources, gathering, church groups, civic groups can collect supplies and be sources of communication as well. Being mindful of our time and wanting to make sure that we address what we said we would, we were saying for our third question, some of the common elements of strong literacy instruction. And if there are others that, Vicki, you want to start with, or others jump in to share what your beliefs are as well.
Well, and as we mentioned in our book, we invited 21 educators to share with us some of the instructional programs that they put in place to support students who are living in poverty, as well as other students who may be experiencing difficulties. And Rachelle was one of our authors. Rachelle and her co-author provided a vignette, but what was particularly strong about this particular vignette was his focus on disciplinary learning and cross-cultural disciplinary learning. So tell us about that, Rachelle, so everyone's caught up.
I knew I was going to be put on the spot, and then I didn't prep for it. So we really focused on this idea of making learning connected to the community. And, you know, when we think about disciplinary literacy, it is not just I'm doing science, I'm reading a textbook about science, but it's engaging in science. And so we really wanted to highlight this need that our students' voices need to be included. The problems that they're concerned about needed to be included. And we all have problems in our neighborhoods and our communities. And so we kind of unpacked a scenario as to, well, what can that look like for our students to make sure that their voices are heard and that they're part of the learning, they're co-constructing the knowledge and the curriculum. And that's actually, so that vignette is what stemmed the book that's coming out in August. I don't know, Vicki and Doris, if you knew that, but that's actually what stemmed it. And so we really wanted this understanding that it's the students' funds of knowledge, it's what they're thinking, what they're doing, but that connects with the disciplines that they're engaging with, that then connects with literacy, because you're learning, you're processing, you're communicating. And so it's not just that foundational reading and writing of literacy, but it is how are you really engaging into what's important to them to be able to learn.
And you already posted some characteristics of strong instruction, but in particular, what you're addressing there is acknowledging students' experiences, their funds of knowledge, the questions that they have, so that the curriculum becomes designed around their interests, their questions, and their knowledge, and takes them further. Years ago, I worked with the cognitive psychologist, John Bransford, and his idea of strong instruction was setting it up as problem-based. What are the problems that students are interested in? What are the questions they have? And then go deep to find the answers to those questions. It's very supportive of students' learning. Doris?
And I would also bring into the fact that we need to look at our literature. And we know that it's important for students to see themselves and to experience the lives of others, and then to make those critical kinds of connections to their own lives and experiences. And so being able to integrate that kind of thinking with rich discussions that we know will challenge them to think about the impact more broadly of what the issue is that they're exploring, and the interconnectedness to both life and to the disciplines that can be made. Those are important considerations. We also know that sometimes those children in poverty don't get an opportunity to read full books, but we need to bring full books in that are appropriate, that will challenge, but at the same time engage students in that kind of critical thinking to build on their funds of knowledge. And one of the things that relates to, and we found our one of our writers in our vignettes for our book, Blaine Smith, developed an opportunity where she used storytelling along with digital multimodal kind of composing to support a socio-scientific issue of interest to her middle school students. And as she did that, she found that this was an opportunity for these multilingual girls to be engaged collaboratively as well as working individually, assuming roles such as the designer, the writer, the scientist, in investigating what they created was a science fiction genre. And a story that they wanted to create and have use the interactive tools to develop this interactive kind of flip book that focused on a story that they had. I believe it was about a turtle that they created using all of their imagination and learning about this particular genre to create. And so I think ways of using those science fiction mentor texts engage the students, as well as having their interests about the topic that related to them and their community was inspiring. And one of the ways that we think that literature can be incorporated and that will help students to discuss, learn presentation skills, and to be able to communicate their thoughts in line with the relevance of the issues that they're studying within the classroom context. Now, this was an after-school program, and I think we can do more as we think about challenging and developing that disciplinary knowledge in after-school settings that incorporate the knowledge of STEM subjects, and also build in what we know to be the rich literature and sources of knowledge that come through technology as well.
And they were quite creative with the text that they developed. Students were very facile with the use of technology and finding videos and finding auditory presentations of information that they incorporated into their texts. Another example that came from our vignettes was from Mark Pacheco, and Mark is on the faculty at the University of Florida. He was one of our former doc students, actually, at Vanderbilt, and he and his two colleagues are focusing on children who are multilingual. And the title of his vignette was "Even Little Things Can Be Big Things." So they read a text that was about living in particular areas and dealing with some of the natural disasters. But also embedded in that text was, how do you make decisions each day when you're confronted with a problem? And by starting with that question, what do you decide each day? What do your friends ask you to do? How do you respond to that? What do you decide that you're going to do if you have a problem? Pretty simple questions, but these middle school students had quite a bit that they wanted to talk about that was personal to them, but also something that could be shared in small groups. And as they were sharing with each other their use of their multiple languages, they encouraged their home language as well as the use of English throughout those discussions, helped them to not only see the relationships across languages and concepts, but also their ability to put their ideas in ways that could communicate meaning to each other. So the character analysis was the goal for that lesson, but the outcome was deeper comprehension and use of multiple languages.
And as you share that, Vicki, I think that we want to, and this comes out in Smith's work, and I hear it as well in your description. and Mark's work, but to help children to make those, and I said children, I should really say students, to make those connections with those socio kind of scientific or political issues, and then to provide the scaffolding where we have those resources and personnel in place to talk about how do you animate, how do you work to use sound and other medium to present information, and then to be open and flexible with the kind of creativity that something like storytelling allows, and narratives that may come from students who are immigrants and refugees. How we can build on that kind of creative, collaborative work that they may want to share their experiences and their knowledge, and to be open to providing those spaces within the classroom context to do that. And then I heard you, Vicki, also talk about the authentic kind of audiences and sharing opportunities where the words and the thoughts and the ideas and the feelings can be communicated in multiple ways, and multiple audiences, so that there's a validation, a sharing of ownership of what is presented, as well as a growth experience and a healing, I think, in some respects, for related to trauma that some of the students may experience, if it's an issue that is particularly relevant to the kinds of life and experiences of the students that we know live in poverty. And as
And I
we
and I was
go
just
ahead.
going to add to that. I think embedded in that work is an emphasis of providing time for teachers to know their students and to provide opportunities for students to generate their questions and the connections that they are making. So when we were developing these problem-solving learning opportunities several years ago for fourth and fifth graders, we would set a context. Sometimes we'd watch a film, sometimes we'd listen to a text, but there would be enough information embedded in those texts or those videos to help students think about, I wonder about this. I don't know about that. What else can I learn? And then in small groups, we would pursue ways to address those questions, finding information, seeking other sources, small groups sharing with other small groups, so that learning just abounded across the classroom. But it begins with knowing your students and knowing what they know and what they want to know.
I also wanted to jump in. I think, Vicki, we both, you're more familiar with the actual experience of having what might be poetry cafes,
Yes.
opportunities, and after school programs. Do you want to say a little bit more
Well,
about that?
one of the vignette writers did talk about the importance of poetry for some students who have read poetry, find an high interest in poetry. And in Nashville, several years ago, some of my graduate students were supporting middle school students in their literacy development. And they asked if they could meet after school to write poetry, share poetry. So she set up these, what they call poetry cafes. They started with a few students, few girls that came. They would write their poems, share them with each other. Over time, that poetry cafe grew and grew, in that there were multiple groups, and the guys were coming as well. Sometimes they had more musical lyricals, the girls and boys, but it became very much of a activity that was appealing across gender, across cultural backgrounds, and specifically where we found that was so successful was in the middle school. Students had an opportunity to share their thoughts, put it in writing, put it in a poetic form, and to share, and sometimes in song.
And as you add that, there's a recent article which is entitled, I Just Want to Word It Better. And it was developing interdisciplinary, or I should say, developing disciplinary literacies in an after-school spoken word poetry team
Mm.
is the title of it, and I'll share that with Rachelle, but it really addressed this need with middle school students and rethinking the writing process because they were able to work to create poems both individually, collaboratively, to establish ownership, to share their poetry. And it was a way of making writing more meaningful because it emanated from their experiences, their desires, their questions, their ways of expression. And so I think that opportunity to use the spoken word and communicate thoughts, ideas, and feelings is something that's appropriate for multiple grade levels. As we kind of think about where we are, I want to come back to one issue that, and I know, Rachelle, you have written about this with the most recent article about the notion of how we are impacted by book bans as challenges for teachers. As a lover of children's literature, as a firm believer in its power and adolescent literature to speak to the needs of students. I wonder if you would share some of the things that you found in your research that addresses this question of book bans and its impact.
So, in the most recent publication that is co-authored with Dr. Howard for Audrey and Jen, you know them or you know her. We interviewed media specialists and ELA teachers across North Carolina to find out like what their access and use of diverse young adult literature. So they were all middle school and high school. And then we're doing a follow-up exploration of the emotions that teachers have kind of shared connected to the policies and practices regarding censorship. And so in the first article with Dr. Howard, there seemed to be, a couple kind of schools of thoughts of there are some really tough policies in school districts in North Carolina that have not necessarily banned a book, but made it very complicated to be able to use a diverse text that even if that connects to the students or the students want to learn about it and they want to read about it, even if it's not a book that they're all reading, it could just be a book on their shelves. And so like some school districts have policies that you can have it, but you also have to have like multiple additional fully laid out units of instruction prior to even introducing that book. So as a way to not actually say they're censoring you, but then like that's a lot of time that's not provided. There are teachers and media specialists across this state that said, you know what, this is what's important to my students. And so this is how I am going to use books that might be more controversial. There are some districts that really, even to this date in North Carolina, that are very vocal about how what matters most is the students. And so they're going to use the text that align best. And there are some, including myself, that really bring into the teacher standards that you all have. Standard 2 explicitly is connected to culturally sustaining, supporting diverse students' needs. And so some really use those or even the disciplinary standards. But with this most recent analysis, the emotions that come up are, fear of, well, what happens when I do this? We had emotion. Now, mind you, none of our questions actually asked them about emotions. So it's a secondary analysis. So what they said was so clearly connected to an emotion, we were able to see this. We had quite a few teachers that had resignation. Like, look, this is it. Like, we're using Study Sync. We're using this. This is it. We're like, I'm just resigned to this is what I have to do. But we did see motivation and purpose connected to those mirrors and windows so that the books would represent the students. So, I mean, in just one state, there's such variety as to how districts are controlling, how schools are controlling, how administrators are controlling, or on the flip side, how they're supporting and making sure that the voices of the students are what matters the most.
And as you mentioned that there is a research that's been done by First Book, And one of the things that they generated from their research and survey of teachers and librarians and the like was this concern that it is the banning of books that is having an impact on teaching, and that it is also impacting the students' abilities to learn. And so, as we're thinking about this kind of reference, to a way that we might be challenged. I think it's working in groups. Jill Spector in our book talks about some of the actions. I would encourage you to look at it, to think about how teachers can work together when they feel that insecurity about trying the threat of trying to introduce literature. There's a wealth of literature that pertains to poverty, the challenges of homelessness, that we want to make sure that all students have those critical discussions, that they see those people on their street corners, that they know and can understand what it's like to be that. So I think there's a policy and a practice part that does impact. I think our students are questioning, and interesting enough, when students are seen as a book that is being banned, they want to read it. They're reading more. So I think this may be a way in which we can try to get that out of school reading experience in, is to read those and make those titles, if not visible, to them in our official newsletters or out our community letters. But I think that there's some way that by word of mouth that we can communicate that these are some texts and issues that need to be explored. So I think it is an interest that the community barriers, the kind of school-based policies, even self-censoring are issues that we will wrestle with and think about how we still can inform our students and challenge them to do the kind of critical thinking, all of them, but particularly the ones that we know are challenged by poverty.
And I think the other thing that we learned as we were writing this book and talking with our vignette writers, there were two things that seem to help sum up what we've been discussing tonight. One is that the teaching actions are intentional, and they are intentional in that they provide access to knowledge building in ways that honors students as individuals. Now, that's a mouthful, maybe, if I read that, it was in my notes. But the idea is that we are intentional in how we are building knowledge in ways that help us understand what kids already know, what they need to know, what their interests are, and we're honoring them as individuals. We don't have to talk about culture. We're not allowed to in Florida. So, but we're talking about individual differences, and students have needs, they have strengths, they have interests. We're capitalizing on those in ways that support their learning. I think the other thing that is coming out of this instruction that we're discussing is that um, as Doris said, we have a chapter on advocacy written by Jill Spector Lewis. She's very active in Florida and working with state legislators, trying to bring back books that have been banned, et cetera, a very active group. But her point is, and I think this is such an important point for all of us as educators, is we do need to be advocates for our students. We do need to understand the issues that they are facing. We do need to understand the daily problems and challenges that they have, and to advocate for them in ways that support their learning in meaningful ways, making connections with them, let them know what they care. But I think we also have to be advocates for each other. If we're not advocates for each other as knowing individuals, I mean, we're professionals. Each one of you has been prepared to go out and lead classes and develop learnings and learning environments. As professionals, we need to keep that stance that we know something. We have a contribution to make, and we need to be advocates for ourselves as educators. Otherwise, our voices will be totally lost. And I'm afraid that that's happening in too many school districts. So it doesn't mean that you need to confront your principal or confront the superintendent, but it is a way of asserting that I know something and I can help these students, and I can show that through the instruction that I provide.
I would add that this is not a short-term investment in students and in our efforts. It's a long-term opportunity to make a difference. And as we end this, I also want to thank you for challenging us to think in ways that are even deeper than what we started with, for the efforts that you're making individually and collectively, and for the sharing of knowledge that is so critical, that we grow and we do more when we know more. And I thank you for this opportunity to
Yes.
share.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you both so much for being here. I know we are right at 7, and I don't know how Vicki and Doris feel. Can we open it up for about 5 minutes if people have questions, or are we okay
Sure.
with that? Excellent. You shared so much, and I'm just thank you. And so I do a couple minutes if somebody has any questions and you want to unmute or put it in chat.
You can tell us your questions. That's fine.
Audrey, I see you're ready.
Well, no, Aubrey, go first. Because mine's
Jen's
gonna
ready.
it's like parts with bullet points and glitter. Like it's a thing. So Aubrey, go first.
Okay, so I know we talked about a lot of things about parental involvement and making sure that these programs adhere to students, and then making sure that our instruction kind of adheres to their interests and their identities. But then we'd also talked about how a lot of districts are scripting curriculum more and more. And so I ran into this problem this year, actually, where our school uses a program that does work, and it works to get test scores. But when it comes to teaching children how to read, what's the purpose for reading, it's more we teach them the strategy to use when they take the test versus the strategy to what do good readers do. And not that the strategy doesn't work, it's just how this school teaches it. And so one of the challenges that I faced was when working with more experienced teachers who'd seen a lot of benefit with this strategy, and addressing how, well, there's a group of students, about 20% of our grade, because we know generally about 20% of learners are going to need a different approach, that we weren't benefiting. And the response was, well, they need a comprehension tier 2 intervention, but the district doesn't provide that, so we're just going to keep on trucking and hope it works. So how would you suggest, as reading advocates and reading professionals, approaching those situations where the scripted curriculums are not giving the students what they need, but you're at a very cohesive school where everyone is kind of doing the same thing, and there are very strong expectations over what your instruction looks like? Like, how would you advise advocating in those situations for students who need that, that building of background knowledge, that different approach to reading?
Well, you have to be trusted, right, in your school district. But what I saw in several schools when I was helping the State Department in Tennessee is there were some creative ways that teachers would come together to think about the students who were not being reached by their curriculum. They called them data meetings so that they had the data to support their concerns. They had data that was shared over time, so they could substantiate their worries. And from there, they convinced their coaches and their immediate supervisors to make some adjustments in their instruction. Now, that was a very thoughtful approach. It took time to develop those alternative forms of instruction. but we were beginning to see the impact of it because parents got involved, teachers supported those changes for those students. It's a slow moving vehicle actually, but it over time can be quite effective. Does that help at all?
Yeah. I think I'm just, part of that. I want a quick solution,
I
like I
know.
want something to be like, hey, look at this. This is your solution. And I guess it doesn't quite exist like that.
And I
Especially if
think
you're experiencing difficulties, there aren't quick fixes, as we know. So the long-term planning may be the most effective, but
Right.
it does take time to communicate with other teachers, with parents, that these changes are being made for these reasons, and we're going to follow this very carefully, very systematically, etc. So these scripted programs say they're systematic, they're well tested, etc. You want to say what you're putting in place is also going to be well tested, examined, and carefully monitored over time. You want to give it credibility, but as I can tell, you have lots of ideas in terms of strong instruction. You can put that together with your peers and start to implement those in ways that may be effective. It's one way, it's one suggestion. Doris, what are you thinking?
I was also going to suggest sometimes there are university focused reading clinics, after school programs that may be recommended resources for trying something new in the context of going along, because they don't have to follow the structured or scripted program of the district. They're designing instruction that is around the needs of the students. And so sometimes having that as another recommended outlet for families that would extend the comprehension focus that you have, the joy and the love of reading, reading for pleasure that you want to ultimately gain. They can be sometimes with no pay, as our reading program at Marquette encourages parents to send their students to based on teacher recommendation, but it is generally focused on some of them on struggling readers. So particularly as you described, those needing tier 2 intervention would be those who are struggling. So I would look for those kinds of university school connected labs, clinics that either provide full year programs, 2 semester, and oftentimes, as we have one here for in recognition of the work and the contributions of Dwayne Wade, the basketball star. Those are opportunities where those children can come to a summer program and continue with that kind of instruction that is more focused on a comprehension, building up the foundational skills as well, but not tied to a specific program. So that's maybe a reaching outside the school context is what I wanted to share.
And university partnerships are, I think, important that she's connecting to. Are the two of you okay to answer Jen's question? Jen's also one of my former students who just graduated and is phenomenal. And so I'm trying to, they both had questions. Are you okay with
Yeah,
answering Jen?
where
Yep.
is it in
Yep,
the
we are.
She's going
Oh
to
no,
unmute. She's a
it's like
talker.
10 parts, and Dr. Savitz will
One part,
interpret
Jen.
for me
One
if I
part.
need to. Oh,
One
okay.
part.
okay?
Okay, so I want to know how we take all of this goodness and then we move it into a self-contained space. What about those kids? Where is that planning time to where I could press in with those other teachers to bring all of that back to my classroom, so when my students press out for their gen ed time, to absorb all that they can in a way that's absolutely meaningful for them, not overwhelming, but meaningful. I have kids that are gaining skills left and right. Could it be a benefit to have older kids walk some of my students through environmental print, which you could help your older students, is the reason why it's important to understand what these things are. And then there's that incidental learning there, but then you're also including students like mine in the classroom who present their learning differently. I have kids who have beautiful verbal retellings. I count that as their grade. I don't make them write that. That is their demonstration of learning. It's exquisite. Or to watch them draw out stories in their learning. How do we take all of that goodness and break down these multiple barriers where it says it has to be this way and this is what's called learning, when learning is so unique and individual to the person? Like, how do we take all of that and expand it outside its normal box? How do we break the box and support all learners beyond the tiers and in poverty? Because I teach in a Title I school. Most of my students do not look like me, and they need my help, and I need to know how to help them. So I want to take all the things and put it in my classroom and then expand as I go other places. Was that a question? I'm really pretty sure there was a question in there. Sorry.
I think if you think about your efforts as being long-term efforts, you define those goals that are most immediate, that can address the needs of all of your students, and then you work in ways that would document what you're proven through your practice and the environment that you set up in your classroom. And then I would just say share it in those ways in your group level or grade level meetings. If it's discipline related sessions, share it with your fellow teachers, and then share with a broader audience, with that conversation with the principal. How are things going? This is what I'm doing. This is how my students are responding. And I also would say, share it with a larger body of knowledgeable people who are educators in our professional journals. The reading teacher is a great way to talk about practice and things that we're doing that make a difference with students, and the goals, that what we started out with, what we learned along the way, because others benefit from your voice. I think sometimes our voices, we feel like if we tell one person, that's enough. But we don't sense that we have a broader responsibility to share those things that we're doing. And so those professional conferences, go to them. Sometimes you don't have maybe 3 or 4 people staying in a room. We did that, and but get on the program, share what you're doing, and that makes a difference. So I'll just start it off, and Vicki, you can
Yeah,
add.
I agree with everything you said. It's a real challenge to make a change because really you're turning the curriculum upside down in some ways. You want to meet those same goals, but you want to meet them in different ways that are different that are currently in place. So you have to be very systematic in terms of what are your goals, what are the experiences to meet those goals, and how will you assess their learning and document, as Doris said. When we went in several years ago, when we were developing our units in elementary school in 4th grade, trying to develop this problem solving idea with John Bransford, our cognitive psychologist, who knew everything about learning. But how do we put that in place? We met with these 4th grade teachers. Luckily, they trusted us because we were just really new at thinking it through. But we started at the very set of goals that we had. We knew our students, we knew what we wanted them to learn, we knew what their strengths and needs were, and then we laid out multiple opportunities. And it really just turned their curriculum upside down. So it required that documentation, careful watching, but the sharing with others and learning from others, that's all part of it. It's a big task to take on as one teacher, but as a cohort, perhaps a teacher with whom you are collaborating, or maybe a set of 3 or 4 teachers at 4th grade level, for example, may be easier to pull off. But I would highly encourage thinking about that, thinking as a group, planning for that. The benefits are great in terms of engagement, in terms of understanding what I'm learning and why I'm learning it, use of information, etc. Can be really good. Good for you.
Yes.
Thank you all. We are 13 minutes over, so I'm going to stay on a few moments in case anybody has any questions. Wanda put in the chat, if you want CEU credits, there is a certificate there that you will be able to complete and fill out. And otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic Thursday evening. Stay safe wherever you're at. If you are getting some of the storms coming, I almost said snowstorms. I want cold weather so badly.
I know.
But
We don't get
You
it in
can't
Florida.
take 2 weeks off school anymore. That's just that hindered the whole thing.
but have a wonderful evening. And Vicki and Doris, thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you.
and letting us learn
Thank
with you.
you. Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah,
Have a good
thank
night.
you again.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
it's good to meet all of you. Good luck to you.